We continue with Let Your Life Speak by Parker J. Palmer. This is Chapter 2, Now I Become Myself, Part 3, Selfhood, Society, and Service. By surviving passages of doubt and depression on the vocational journey, I have become clear about at least one thing. Self-care is never a selfish act. It is simply good stewardship of the only gift I have, the gift I was put on earth to offer to others. Any time we can listen to true self and give it the care it requires, we do so not only for ourselves, but for the many others whose lives we touch. There are at least two ways to understand the link between selfhood and service. One is offered by the poet Rumi in his piercing observation. If you are here unfaithfully with us, you're causing terrible damage. If we are unfaithful to true self, we will extract a price from others. We will make promises we cannot keep, build houses from flimsy stuff, conjure dreams that devolve into nightmares, and other people will suffer if we are unfaithful to true self. I will examine that sort of unfaithfulness and its consequences later in this book. But a more inspiring way of understanding the link between selfhood and service is to study the lives of people who have been here faithfully with us. Look, for example, at the great liberation movements that have served humanity so well in Eastern Europe, Latin America, and South Africa among women, African Americans, and our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters. What we see is simple but often ignored. The movements that transform us, our relations, and our world emerge from the lives of people who decide to care for their authentic selfhood. The social systems in which these people must survive often try to force them to live in a way untrue to who they are. If you are poor, you are supposed to accept with gratitude half a loaf or less. If you are black, you are supposed to suffer racism without protest. If you are gay, you are supposed to pretend that you are not. You and I may not know, but we can at least imagine how tempting it would be to mask one's truth in situations of this sort, because the system threatens punishment if one does not. But in spite of that threat, or because of it, the people who plant the seeds of movements make a critical decision. They decide to live divided no more. They decide no longer to act on the outside in a way that contradicts some truth about themselves that they hold deeply on the inside. They decide to claim authentic selfhood and act it out, and their decisions ripple out to transform the society in which they live, serving the selfhood of millions of others. I call this the Rosa Parks decision, because that remarkable woman is so emblematic of what the undivided life can mean. Most of us know her story, the story of an African American woman who, at the time she made her decision, was a seamstress in her early 40s. On December 1st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks did something she was not supposed to do. She sat down at the front of a bus in one of the seats reserved for whites, a dangerous, daring, and provocative act in a racist society. Legend has it that years later a graduate student came to Rosa Parks and asked, "Why did you sit down at the front of the bus that day?" Rosa Parks did not say that she sat down to launch a movement, because her motives were more elemental than that. She said, "I sat down because I was tired." But she did not mean that her feet were tired. She meant that her soul was tired, her heart was tired, her whole being was tired of playing by racist rules, of denying her soul's claim to selfhood. Of course, there were many forces aiding and abetting Rosa Parks' decision to live divided no more. She had studied the theory and tactics of nonviolence at the Highlander Folk School, where Martin Luther King Jr. was also a student. She was secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, whose members had been discussing civil disobedience. But in the moment she sat down at the front of the bus on that December day, she had no guarantee that the theory of nonviolence would work or that her community would back her up. It was a moment of existential truth, of claiming authentic selfhood, of reclaiming birthright giftedness. And in that moment, she set in motion a process that changed both the lay and the law of the land. Rosa Parks sat down because she had reached a point where it was essential to embrace her true vocation, not as someone who would reshape our society, but as someone who would live out her full self in the world. She decided, I will no longer act on the outside in a way that contradicts the truth that I deeply hold on the inside. I will no longer act as if I were less than the whole person I know myself inwardly to be. Where does one get the courage to sit down at the front of the bus in a society that punishes anyone who decides to live divided no more? After all, conventional wisdom recommends the divided life as the safe and sane way to go. Don't wear your heart on your sleeve. Don't make a federal case out of it. Don't show them the whites of your eyes. These are all the cliched ways we tell each other to keep personal truth apart from public life, lest we make ourselves vulnerable in that rough and tumble realm. Where do people find the courage to live divided no more when they know they will be punished for it? The answer I have seen in the lives of people like Rosa Parks is simple. These people have transformed the notion of punishment itself. They have come to understand that no punishment anyone might inflict on them could possibly be worse than the punishment they inflict on themselves by conspiring in their own diminishment. In the Rosa Parks story, that insight emerges in a wonderful way. After she had sat at the front of the bus for a while, the police came aboard and said, "You know, if you continue to sit there, we're going to have to throw you in jail." Rosa Parks replied, "You may do that," which is a very polite way of saying, what could your jail of stone and steel possibly mean to me, compared to the self-imposed imprisonment I've suffered for 40 years, the prison I've just walked out of by refusing to conspire any longer with this racist system. The punishment imposed on us for claiming true self can never be worse than the punishment we impose on ourselves by failing to make that claim. And the converse is true as well. No reward anyone might give us could possibly be greater than the reward that comes from living by our own best lights. You and I may not have Rosa Parks' particular battle to fight, the battle with institutional racism. The universal element in her story is not the substance of her fight, but the selfhood in which she stood while she fought it. For each of us holds the challenge and the promise of naming and claiming true self. But if the Rosa Parks story is to help us discern our own vocations, we must see her as the ordinary person she is. That will be difficult to do because we have made her into Superwoman, and we have done it to protect ourselves. If we can keep Rosa Parks in a museum as an untouchable icon of truth, we will remain untouchable as well. We can put her up on a pedestal and praise her, worlds without end, never finding ourselves challenged by her life. Since my own life runs no risk of being displayed in a museum case, I want to return briefly to the story I know best, my own. Unlike Rosa Parks, I never took a singular dramatic action that might create the energy of transformation around the institutions I care about. Instead, I tried to abandon those institutions through an evasive, crab-like movement that I did not want to acknowledge, even to myself. But a funny thing happened on the way to my vocation. Today, 25 years after I left education in anger and fear, my work is deeply related to the renewal of educational institutions. I believe that this is possible only because my true self dragged me, kicking and screaming, toward honoring its natures and needs, forcing me to find my rightful place in the ecosystem of life, to find a right relation to institutions with which I have a lifelong lover's quarrel. Had I denied my true self, remaining at my post simply because I was paralyzed with fear, I would almost certainly be lost in bitterness today instead of serving a cause I care about. Rosa Parks took her stand with clarity and courage. I took mine by diversion and default. Some journeys are direct and some are circuitous. Some are heroic and some are fearful and muddled. But every journey, honestly undertaken, stands a chance of taking us toward the place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep need. As May Sarton reminds us, the pilgrimage towards true self will take time, many years and places. The world needs people with the patience and the passion to make that pilgrimage, not only for their own sake, but also as a social and political act. The world still waits for the truth that will set us free. My truth, your truth, our truth, the truth that was seated in the earth when each of us arrived here formed in the image of God. Cultivating that truth, I believe, is the authentic vocation of every human being.